Hi, welcome to B&H Event Space. My name is Allan Markman, and I'm going to be talking about my still life photos, which are all macro still life photos. Okay, so I'll begin now. Okay. First, I want to give just a little bit of background to how I got to photography. It won't take very long. I was trained as a painter and sculptor. And as you could see, I had a circuitous route to photography, which began with this photograph, with this poster, actually. I was working with the United Nations, and they created a new ethics office. And I was the art director at that time, and they asked me to come up with a concept to promote the ethics office from within the United Nations to other parts of the United Nations. So my concept was this, but I needed doors. So my boss told me to get a camera and shoot doors, which I did. It took me 2 weeks out in the streets of New York to shoot photograph doors, and it was during that time that I began to really fall in love with photography. But unfortunately, the poster was rejected, never used, but I started this process of shooting doors. I had hundreds and hundreds of doors from New York, which ultimately became this book. So I continued shooting, and I developed a book, and eventually it was published by a small publisher named Schiffer Publishing, and I was off and running in love with photography. This is a spread from that book. And then I began to fool around with shooting just ordinary objects, simple objects. And I didn't quite know what to do with these things. And so I put this one together, which was the first time I had the idea of hardware, detritus, nature. But now, my exposure to this philosophy of wabi-sabi, Japanese philosophy, came well into my work as a macro photographer. But when I saw it, it kind of made me feel connected to something really ancient. And so it inspired me to really go on with this project. The horseshoe shape is a broken pipe. And just to give you a sense of scale here, those little buds in the center, the 3 of them, are what holds the blossoms on an apple blossom. So when they fall off, that's what's left. So this is quite small. Maybe it's 6 inches from left to right. Now, this is called Brassica nigra because that's the name of the little spheres are actually peppercorns. Once again, showing the scale. Now, all this shooting is done on a small desk in my room with a light bulb for lighting, and this is how I diffuse light. Okay, it's very simple, very simple. It's a mat and 5 sheets of tracing paper. So the less tracing paper, the harsher the light, and the harder the shadows. The more tracing paper, soft, diffuse light. I have 5 sheets here. You could use as much as you want. It could be big. I have one at home I'm using now, which is a circle instead of a square. So all I do is stand this up and lean it on a light bulb. That's it. That's my light. Always to the side, because that's how you get detail. Bicycle chain, berry. And what was so delightful, what was enjoyable to me about this particular image was I didn't know that I had punctured the berry till after I processed it. And I saw that little juice, which is part of the joy of discovering your own work through photography, because you don't really know what you're doing until you really see it. The pitcher plant, which is the tall plant in the middle, is a plant that eats insects. And so, but this is actually not live. This is a plant that I had found. Now, everything I create is from found objects. All the metal, all the detritus is found on the street as I'm walking around. I go for long walks and come back with, I have a shoulder bag with 3 containers, and as I'm walking, I'm collecting bits. And over time, I learned, number 1, what's going to work, what's not going to reflect too much. 2, where is the good stuff? All right? No, this is when you're collecting, where's the good stuff? So there's 2 sides to this. There's the detritus from the street, and there's the live, the flowers, the buds, the berries. That's easy. That's early in the morning, sometimes on people's lawns, most often in public parks. Okay? But the detritus, I discovered over time, because much of this is actually stuff that flew off of cars. So you go to places, so I live in Queens, and I go to places like overpasses where the Van Wyck Expressway is, places like that, there's always, or construction sites as well, there's always something that's broken off of a car, a spring. I mean, if I was a mechanic, I would know what I'm finding, but I don't really know what these things are, but I know they belong to cars. Now, the reason on this particular piece I have scale, because I'm trying to give you, because these are produced quite large. And the reason, and I want to show you the next slide, is to give you a sense of scale, of what I'm actually working with. Okay? So these are really, really small objects. Okay? The background on this particular piece, and the background often, when it's black, is felt. And in this case, I sprinkled little sparkles on the felt before I hung it behind the desk. And that's where the stars are on this piece. And I don't usually work, I consciously avoid actually creating work with narrative. I don't want these to tell stories. I don't want them to be, people to say, oh, you're saying this, or I want it to be, I'm really interested in the formal attributes of what I'm creating. The color, the line, the movement, the texture. That's really what's driving my aesthetic. It's not storytelling. But this one's telling a story, obviously. This particular piece was probably one of the first pieces I created where I was really, really thrilled with the light. I had figured out how to make this stuff be timeless. It had this, people would tell me that this looks like the light is like a Dutch painting, an old Dutch painting. That wasn't a conscious choice, but when I heard that, I realized, aha, so this is really what I want to do, because this is working. That's when I discovered this technique. These are lead sinkers, fishermen's sinkers. The background of this piece is a large piece of bark that fell off of a tree in a park. Large meaning this big. The ghost in this piece originally was a really beautiful leaf from a tropical garden in a park that had been thrown away. There was a dumpster with all this stuff that was being trimmed off of the from the garden, and this was at that time alive. And as I had it in my apartment, it started shriveling and became really an interesting shape to me. It looked like it was going to take off. And so I don't know if any of you know or go to Jones Beach, but if you go there early in the morning, there are dunes, and which all the detritus from the ocean eventually end up back there. It's at the top of the beach, and it's really rich. There are lots of rusted objects, lots of nails, lots of bent, twisted things from boats. It's extraordinary what gets washed up. And so that's one of my major sources of material. I have near a window in my room a shelf, and that shelf gets natural light. That shelf is I put on the back and all the sides. I made basically a light box, covering it with felt, and that's what the black is on this. And this is all natural light from a window early in the morning. So I had met at the Soho Gallery when I had an opening. I met a painter who invited me to his studio, and when I was there, he gave me a musket ball from I don't know when, Civil War. It's really old, and that's what that little ball resting on that rectangle is. It's an old musket, and the green on the top is actually something I found at Jones Beach. It's the end of the rod of a curtain. Point of interest, that little blue ball is a berry whose name I forgot. They proliferate in the fall, and they're extraordinary in color. They're really, really beautiful, and I only later found out that they are a terribly dangerous invasive species. That what they do is they secrete poison into the soil and kills all the other plants around them, which I found amazing. But they're really beautiful, but they are dangerous. Phoenix, this felt to me, after I created it and shot it, like some kind of a shrine. And the cup in the center is an acorn. And what fills it is the ashes from incense, from burnt incense. So I had this feeling of it being a shrine. I made a series of these shrines. Here's another shrine. I've often wondered, and if there are any birders in this room, what the spotted feather belongs to. Whose feather is that? If anyone knows, please. Also, another interesting, that white shape in the lower right-hand corner is what is on the bottom of Venetian blinds, the plastic that pulls up Venetian blinds. So everything, anything, is extraordinary. There's nothing boring. There's nothing mundane, really, if you can transform it, if you can look at it carefully, and so that's my takeaway from this. It's, you know, photography, art in general, but photography in particular, in my view, when you're really in it, changes you dramatically, because your consciousness becomes attuned to beauty because that's what you're living in. When you're walking in the street, if you're a street photographer or any kind of photographer, really, all of a sudden everything's alive and potentially beautiful because that's what you're looking for. So how does it change you? It's quite profound, really, when you think about it, when you live it. It's a beautiful thing, beautiful experience. This is another shrine. The object on in this particular photograph, that really gave me joy was that sphere on the top with those beautiful sundial shadows to me. What it is the cap on a keg, a small keg of beer. And on the right, the metal object is the head of an axe. I find, for whatever reasons, there was a period of my life when I started finding balls every place I went. Balls, right? And I actually started to collect them. I had bags of them, and I intended to do something with them. And I threw most of them away, but now I found something for the ones I kept to do with, because they're rich. The ball on this and this is the same one, and I found it once again at the beach with those little mullocks. Am I saying that right? Those little mullocks, right? Yeah, the little mullocks on them. I was amazed that they attach themselves to this rubber ball. Part of the process of working with live objects, live parts of nature, as opposed to working with metal and detritus, is the element of time becomes a major component of the work, because I'm under pressure, because these things are dying as I'm working. They are wilting and dying, and this is a perfect example. Those mushrooms I found in a park about 2.5 miles from my home, and I had to get them home and use them really fast because they were going to shrivel. And so that becomes a part of the process. I have to work fast. In the spring and the summer, I have to work fast. In the autumn and winter, I don't, because I'm working with dried leaves and things and parts of nature that are not going to wither because they're ready. They've come to the end of their cycle. I have plenty of time to play with them. There's a little disc on my desk where I would just, after using a berry or an acorn, I just put stuff there. I'm finished with that now. And over time, it became something in and of itself. And so I shot it. And that's what this is. Why this is called tenacity is these two leaves were the last two leaves in the winter on a tree, a completely bare tree. There was nothing there except these two leaves, and I was walking in the winter, and they were shaking. The wind was blowing them, and I was really kind of moved by the fact that they were still there. This was shot just about a month and a half ago. And the impetus to create this piece was the green stalked flower with little white and green tops, which I found in a family room in a cancer ward in Mount Sinai Hospital, because you couldn't bring flowers into the hospital itself. So it was just sitting there, and it had been there for a number of days, and I just took a piece. Sorry. Another part of the process to extend the depth of field in macro photography, the macro lens, I use Photoshop photo stacking. I don't know how many of you have heard of it or used it. Okay, because typically you'll notice that in these photos, often I'm shooting them maybe 4 inches, 6 inches, 3 inches away. But typically with a macro lens, you'll get sharp focus and then blur. What focus stacking is, is the following. And if you Google it, you'll get very simple videos on how to use it. You focus on the nearest object in your setup to you. The nearest thing, automatic focus. And when that focus is locked in, you go to manual focus. And then you shoot you shoot it again at that point. And then you go further into the objects, right? So you go a little closer with your lens, so that until you get to infinity, until you get to the thing that's furthest away. It could be 4 or 5 or 6 shots. So you have the things in the back are an absolute sharp focus, and the things in the front, and everything in between is an absolute sharp focus. And then there's a function of Adobe Photoshop in which you select those layers. You import let me back up. My two main tools in software are, of course, Lightroom and Adobe Photoshop. They work hand in hand. So the photos are taken and imported into Lightroom. So let's talk about this photo, for example. This is an easy one because there's not much depth. It's not very deep, okay? But the closest object is this sphere face on, okay? That's the closest object to me, right? So I focus on that, and then I lock that focus in. And then the furthest object is that red ball in the back, right? And then I keep on shooting until that red ball in the back is in focus, if I want it to be, because I could stop at any point, right? But okay, and then I import all those photos into Lightroom, and then I export those photos into Photoshop as layers. So you have 5 layers of the shots you just took, and they're all in focus. And then you select those layers, and then you combine them into the process where you combine them into one photograph. What Photoshop does is it finds everything that's in focus and masks out everything that's not in each layer, and then it combines them into one photograph seamlessly, in which everything which is nearly impossible to do unless you have a really large format camera to shoot really close, really sharp, right through. And so people often ask me, do you use a large format camera? No. If I had the money, I would. But the fact is, I use this. Sony, okay? With this macro lens. It's quite modest, really. But with the Photoshop technique, I can get that really, really deep depth of field. I normally shoot f/18 to f/20. F/18 is like the sweet spot, but sometimes I go to f/22, but it's not quite as clear. So now I usually end up at f/18. This doesn't go past f/22. Okay?
What would you say approximately the interval is in the distance where you...
How many steps?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's really trial and error. You know, I tried, you know, in something like this, right? It was only 2 steps, right? Because it's not very deep, right? But because I often work, having been a graphic designer, I tend to work on a plane from left to right, which, you know, I don't often think in depth. I think graphically across. So a lot of my pieces actually are moving from left to right, not necessarily in and out. So a lot of pieces don't have a lot of depth. And so there aren't that many steps. When I started this, I couldn't figure out the technique, and I didn't understand it. And I wasn't shooting in, I was shooting across. I was shooting, in other words, I put the camera focus here, all across as if it was a grid. And I ended up with sometimes 60 photographs. Now I get 2 or 3. I didn't know what I was doing. I was figuring this out. So 60 photographs would take an hour to process, which is crazy, but it worked, but it was crazy, you know? So ultimately I figured out, you know, the simple way to do it. Another part of the game that I play with this creation is balance. I love playing with balance because this really took hours to create, to stack, because they just kept on everything just kept on falling down, you know. But this is really delicately balanced. I don't know if that comes across visually. But in creating it, it's definitely a test of patience, and when it works, when they're all stacked and everything's not falling, it's quite satisfying, but painful to take apart. No, because they're sculptures. I mean, if I had a way of creating, of doing something and making them actually occupy space and blowing them up, I would do so, but I can't. I did a series of shooting down. This stuff is actually in a shoebox. Another resource is when the highway department puts new blacktop on streets. I live in Queens, by the way. And so they put new blacktop on streets. They tear apart the old stuff. And all those plates and that for sewer and water running, it gets tossed aside. Sometimes they crack it. Sometimes they put something new on. They just leave it on the side of the street. And they're beautiful objects. I mean, look at the patina. Look at the green patina on this thing that they just threw away. The Eastern Water was, I'm sure, from a time when American manufacturers made the steel that was being used in our streets. I'm sure now it would be made in India. There's a poignant story about this piece, and it's not about photography. I shot these little white flowers, which are, I forgot they have a name, but I forgot what they are. They're really teeny and they're really beautiful and pure and white. I got these in a park in Long Island. And I had shot these same flowers in Queens. And when I blew it up and processed it and looked at them, they were full of black specks. What were those specks? Those specks were pollution, right? I couldn't use it. I could not use it. And I'm thinking, my God, I'm breathing this stuff. This is in my lungs. This black stuff is, and it was a kind of a shocking moment to me, visually telling me what actually air is in Queens, Manhattan, etc. So, but the beauty is what it is. This piece is almost exclusively made from the parts and tubing of cars, of the motor of cars, things that fell out of cars. I don't know what they are, except for this, which is a fan belt. That arch is a fan belt. And so when I find objects and shoot objects, I really, really avoid shining. I avoid glare. So this old rubber never reflects anything. I find it really easy to shoot and really easy to have soft shadows on them. They're really beautiful. The feather is from a pheasant, and that I didn't find. I ordered it on eBay from China. Now, the background here is watercolor paper and pastel. Black and gray pastels. So this object is actually a wire cutter that's this big that someone had thrown. Someone was moving and they threw out this gigantic old wire cutter, and so this is just an inch of that wire cutter. Also old, forged steel, made in USA. an ancient relic. One of the illusions here that makes this work is the indentation in the large shell creates the illusion that the ball sitting on top of it is weighing it down. And what's in the ball are dried rose petals. Much of what's in here is farm implements. And also, once again, I actually ordered them from eBay. Cheating. When I created this piece, I wanted to indicate scale. I didn't want people to think it was large, because it has the appearance of being something that could be quite big. That's why there's a leaf. The purple berry on the right is belladonna, which is highly poisonous but extremely beautiful this time of year. They grow amongst hedges, and they have these beautiful little purple flowers and purple berries. And so if you don't eat them, it's fine. I don't know, looking at the general age of this group, there are many people in this room who love typewriters. I know I do. They are really beautiful objects. They're beautiful machines. And so someone threw it away. Leonard Cohen was one of the first Westerners to write about the Japanese philosophy of wabi-sabi. And he has a book, very small book, that talks about it. Wabi-sabi is the kind of foundation of the Japanese tea ceremony. Its aesthetic that's what drives that ceremony. And once again, it spoke to me about what I was already doing. It made me feel connected to something really old, which inspired me to know that this approach to beauty is so ancient. That little metal object holding the leaf with the blue tip is an old vaping device, a part of an old vaping device. Sometimes my wife is horrified when I come home with stuff. Absolutely horrified. And when I'm with her and I find things, she says, "You can't touch that. A dog could have peed on it," right? she just can't believe it, and she loves the art, and she's my best editor and critic, but she doesn't love the process. Okay, another tool, I shouldn't call it a tool, another object that I find particularly appealing is vines. They amaze me. When you look at a bush that's covered in vines, they are completely symbiotic with these bushes. They completely support them, and when you look at them, sometimes you'll see, especially in the autumn when they're starting to get brown, they're reaching out. They are constantly searching for something to grab onto, because that's how they stay alive. That's how they maintain themselves. And sometimes you'll see a vine with this curlicue, and it's grasped onto a leaf, and the leaf it's not helping it whatsoever. But you could see, and so I collect vines. I have a shoebox full of vines. In the fall, particularly, they turn brown and orange. They're quite beautiful. And here is man copying vines. The object sitting in the eggshell on the bottom is a dogwood berry. When they dry, they're really interesting. They're really, really quite rich in texture. In the summertime, they're edible. I was in a park where I collect stuff, and there was a Russian man picking these berries, these dogwood berries off the tree and wolfing them down. And I didn't know. He said, "What's the matter? You can eat." So, dogwood. This piece needs a title, but I don't have one. The chains, to me, are water. But I haven't yet figured out the poetry of it. Once again, someone pruned their tree and threw it all out, but it was still really alive. And so I brought it home and put it in water, because when I brought it home, they hadn't yet opened. So I had the opportunity to watch it and wait for the moment when I thought it was revealing some interesting color and shape. What delighted me about this only after the fact was these weeds, which come from my landlord's backyard, the smaller one caught the light from behind, and it's shining through. Excuse me, and that delighted me. As did the little one on the top, in the top upper left. The light is shining through. Now this particular piece is extremely close, and this is a very, very small set. this piece is about 2 inches from left to right in reality. The little teeny flower on the bottom is, oh gosh, I don't know, I can't even describe it. It's definitely a third or a fifth of the size of my pinky nail. It's everything here is very, very tiny. The curlicue is a vine that grows the cucumbers. My landlord's cucumbers were attached to this at one point. I sneak down early in the morning and I take his vines. So part of the process is being a joyful thief. Because of the use of the child's blue, the dollhouse blue chair, this piece starts approaching narrative. It's telling a story. Those two corner pieces, the metal slabs with the holes, were left behind at a construction site where a bridge was being renovated in Queens, and I took quite a few of them home. It was quite a walk home. They're quite heavy. This is all about vines and lines. It's all about lines. These curlicue vines were also once part of a cucumber vine, and they shriveled up and turned a beautiful golden. So you collect them and you wait, and they pay back. That's a seagull feather. And on the bottom, the brown object is a dobbin from old time knitting machines. This piece is all set up in a section of cardboard packaging, and the various substances on the bottom, from the red berry to the other side, is incense ashes, there's coffee, there's salt, cinnamon. I use just spices to bed it with. And that's the last picture. And if you'd like to ask questions, please do.